The chipped formica of the diner booth felt cool under Red's forearms. Rain lashed against the plate glass window of the Lucky Spoon, mirroring the bleakness in her own gut. The coffee tasted like burnt pennies. But the heat was welcome. November in Port Blossom, Maine, clawed at you with damp and grey. Sarah Beth Miller, the voice crackled through her phone. Old Man Tiber, her usual fence for information. And occasionally work. 23 vanished 3 days ago. Parents offering $1,000 cash for a quick return. Skip out. Seems simple. Red swirled the coffee. Simple was a siren song in this business. Simple usually ain't. This one is. No history, no trouble. Just gone. Dad's a retired lobsterman. Frank, tight-lipped but worried. They got a lawyer, some fancy Boston type, handling everything. $1,000, enough to keep the heat on for another month, maybe even replace the cracked windshield on the Charger. And a clean skip-out was a palate cleanser between the messier cases she sometimes took. "Send me the details," she said, already reaching for her jacket. The Lucky Spoon was a good place to think, but thinking didn't find people. The address led to a block of newly renovated apartments overlooking the harbor. Port Blossom was clinging to a slow revival, trading its rough and tumble fishing town reputation for something approaching. Quaint. These apartments were part of the upgrade, all nautical blues and crisp white trim. Too clean for this town, Red thought. Frank Miller met her in the lobby, his face a roadmap of weathered worry. He was a big man still possessing the bulk of a working fisherman, but his shoulders were slumped, his grip loose. He led her to the second floor. "Thank you for coming, miss." "Call me Red." She kept her expression neutral. These people, the ones with something to lose, always sized you up, judged whether you were worth the money. "Red, right. Sarah Beth's apartment is. Well, look for yourself." The door opened onto a space that felt less lived in, more staged, sparse furniture, neutral colors, everything in its place. A cookbook lay open on the kitchen counter, bookmarked with a faded postcard of Acadia National Park. Red flipped through it. The pages were pristine, no splatters, no food stains, no dog-eared corners. "She liked to cook?" Red asked. Frank shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "She said she was learning. Said she wanted to surprise us with a Thanksgiving dinner." A lie or a half-truth, Red couldn't tell. The place screamed. Samoan planned to be gone. Clothes were still in the closet, neatly arranged by season. Her toothbrush was in the holder, a half-empty tube of toothpaste beside it. Her purse sat on the hall table, wallet inside with a reasonable amount of cash. Everything was in order, too much so. "Anything missing?" "Not that we've noticed. Just her." Frank's voice cracked. He wasn't meeting her eyes. Red moved to the living room, running a gloved hand over the polished surface of a coffee table. Not a speck of dust. She checked the windows, all locked. No signs of forced entry. The whole scene felt manufactured, like a movie set abandoned mid-shoot. Something was deeply wrong. Her friend's boyfriend. She dated a bit, nothing serious, mostly local boys, no one she spoke about much. And her friends. Frank hesitated. She wasn't social, kept to herself, worked at the bookstore downtown. Red made a mental note. The bookstore was a good place to start. Frank seemed distant, almost relieved that she was there, sifting through his daughter's life. It was unsettling. "I'll need a recent photo," Red said. Frank fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he scrolled through the gallery. He handed it over, his face etched with pain. Sarah Beth's image stared back at her. Mid-20s, dark hair, wide-set blue eyes. She looked ordinary, which made the whole situation even stranger. "I'll be in touch," Red said, handing back the phone. I need to speak with her employer, friends, anyone who might have seen her recently. Frank nodded, his eyes vacant. Thank you. Red left the apartment building and headed downtown. The bookstore, the Salty Quill, was a cozy space, crammed with overflowing shelves and the scent of old paper. A bell tinkled as she entered. A young woman with bright pink hair and a nose ring looked up from behind the counter. Can I help you? I'm looking for information about Sarah Beth Miller. She works here, right? The woman's smile vanished. She did. She took a few days off, unexpectedly. Did she say what for? No, she just called in sick, said she wasn't feeling well. She seemed distracted the last few days. Quiet, even for Sarah Beth. Did she mention anything unusual? Any plans? Anyone she was seeing? The woman hesitated. Not really, except... She lowered her voice. She was talking about meeting some people. Fancy folks, she called them. Said they were offering her an opportunity. Fancy folks. Do you know who she meant? No, she didn't say. She just seemed excited, but also scared, like she was getting in over her head. Red's gut tightened. Fancy folks. That didn't sound like Port Blossom. Did she say when she was meeting these people? I think it was the night she disappeared. Friday. She mentioned going out for drinks afterward. Friday. 3 days ago. Red's timeline was starting to take shape. She thanked the bookstore clerk, promising to be in touch, and headed back towards the harbor. She needed to talk to the lawyer. Victor Sterling's office occupied the top floor of the newly built Mariners Trust building. Glossy, modern, a world away from the weathered charm of Port Blossom. Sterling himself was equally polished, late 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of easy confidence that came from years of winning. He greeted Red with a cool smile and a firm handshake. Ms. Red, I'm working with the Millers. Yes, I was expecting you. Frank contacted me earlier. As you can imagine, they are quite distraught. Sterling gestured for her to sit. His office offered a panoramic view of the harbor, the rain now a dull sheen on the water. I'm trying to get a sense of what happened to Sarah Beth, Red said, cutting to the chase. Her family seems reserved. They are private people, and understandably anxious. Sarah Beth is their only daughter. Her parents say she was learning to cook, planning Thanksgiving dinner. But her apartment doesn't suggest someone planning a family meal. It suggests someone who was planning to leave. Sterling's smile didn't falter. Young people change their minds. Perhaps she was simply restless, looking for something new. The bookstore clerk said she was meeting fancy folks the night she disappeared. Sterling let out a dismissive chuckle. Small town gossip, I assure you. Sarah Beth was not involved with anyone remotely dangerous. She was a sweet, innocent girl. Innocent girls don't usually disappear without a trace. Red's voice was low. Sterling steepled his fingers, his eyes locking onto hers. Ms. Red, I understand you're doing your job, but I suggest you don't jump to conclusions. This is a simple case of a young woman needing some space. She'll turn up. I'm confident of it. He was too confident, too smooth. He was hiding something. As Red left the Mariners Trust building, the rain had intensified, turning the streets slick and treacherous. She decided to go back to Sarah Beth's apartment. Something about it hadn't felt right. Something was nagging at her. She let herself back in with the key Frank had given her. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, impeccably tidy, sterile. She started a methodical search, starting with the bedroom. She checked under the bed, inside the drawers, behind the curtains. Nothing. Then, in the living room, she focused on a small bookshelf built into the wall. It was crammed with paperbacks, mostly thrillers and mysteries. Red scanned the titles, a wry smile tugging at her lips. someone with good taste. As she reached for a book, her fingers brushed against something odd, a slight give in the wood. She pressed harder, and a section of the bookshelf clicked and slid inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled amongst a tangle of wires, was a burner phone and a single photograph. The phone was a cheap model, the kind you could buy with cash at any convenience store. Red powered it on. It was wiped clean. No contacts, no messages, no call history. The photograph, however, wasn't clean. It was a grainy, black and white image. Sarah Beth, laughing, her arm linked with two men in dark suits, standing in front of a luxury yacht. The yacht's name was visible in the background, Seraphina, and one of the men, Red, recognized him instantly. Julian Thorne, a known associate of the Carmine family, one of the most powerful and ruthless organized crime syndicates on the East Coast. Red felt a chill crawl down her spine. This wasn't a simple skip-out. This was something far more dangerous. The burner phone hummed in her hand. Then, a single incoming call. The screen displayed a single word. Don't. The single word on the burner phone's screen pulsed like a threat. Don't. Red stared at it, her knuckles white as she gripped the device. Don't investigate further. Don't ask questions. Don't get involved. Easy for them to say. She never took easy. She ran a trace on the phone's prepaid account. It was layered with proxies, a deliberate attempt to obscure its origins. But Red was good at peeling back layers. The trail led to a rundown motel on the outskirts of Port Blossom, the kind of place where secrets went to fester, the Mariner's Rest. It bordered the sprawling, decaying stockyards, a labyrinth of pens, processing plants, and shadowed back rooms, a world away from the polished veneer of Victor Sterling's office. The Mariner's Rest smelled of stale smoke, disinfectant, and desperation. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a permanent frown, barely glanced up as Red flashed a 20. Looking for someone? She asked, her voice raspy. Information about a guest. Sarah Beth Miller. Stayed here recently. The woman's eyes flickered. Don't recall. Red pressed the 20 further across the counter. She was seen with a man. Big fella went by Silas. The woman's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around a chipped mug. Silas, he is around. Does security work for some of the businesses down at the yards? When did they check in? Couple weeks ago, came and went. Sarah Beth just stayed a couple of nights, seemed nervous, kept to herself. Did you overhear anything? Any conversations? Just snippets. Something about money, a deal. She seemed scared of Silas, but also desperate. The clerk's gaze drifted to a security camera in the corner. That is all I know, and I've said too much already. Red thanked her, pocketing the change, and headed towards the stockyards. The air thickened with the stench of manure, blood, and something acrid she couldn't quite place. The sounds were a cacophony, thudy, the lowing of cattle, the clang of metal gates, the shouts of workers. The place felt ancient, brutal, a relic of a bygone era. Navigating the stockyards was like wandering a concrete maze. Pens stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with restless animals awaiting their fate. Workers moved with a grim efficiency, their faces etched with weariness. Deals were struck in hushed tones in shadowy corners, briefcases exchanged, hands slipping under tables. Red felt eyes on her, following her movements. Not overtly, but a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She pretended to study a map of the complex, sketching out a route. But she was really cataloguing escape routes and potential ambush points. She started asking around, showing Sarah Beth's picture. Most people shrugged, feigned ignorance. This wasn't a place where people offered information freely. Finally, a grizzled old-timer leaning against a loading dock offered a cryptic response. That girl, seen her with Silas a few times. He is a bad man to cross. Works for Moretti. Keeps things orderly. Moretti, a name that resonated with a dangerous chill. Dominic Moretti, the undisputed kingpin of the Stockyards, rumored to have connections that stretched all the way to Boston and beyond. As Red turned to leave, a voice barked, Well, look what we have here." 3 men blocked her path, all burly, all wearing the same scowl. They were Silas's associates. She recognized them from the clerk's description. "You askin' too many questions." The largest of the 3, a man with a scarred face, said, "This ain't a place for tourists. Just looking for someone," her hand inching towards the Glock tucked under her jacket. "You found 'em, and now you're gonna leave." The scarred man lunged. Red reacted instinctively, pivoting and delivering a sharp elbow to his jaw. He stumbled back, clutching his face. The other 2 came at her simultaneously. The ensuing scuffle was brutal, confined to a narrow alleyway between 2 processing plants. Red was outnumbered, but she was quick and resourceful. She used every trick she'd learned on the street, summoned a knee to the groin, a swift kick to the shins, a well-placed elbow to the temple. But they kept coming, relentless and fueled by adrenaline. One of them managed to land a punch, connecting with her cheekbone. Pain exploded in her head. She tasted blood. She stumbled, but regained her footing, using the momentum to sweep the legs out from under her attacker. Just when she thought she might be overwhelmed, a shout rang out. "Hey, what is going on here?" The remaining attacker hesitated, glancing towards the source of the voice. Red used the opportunity to break free, shoving the man into a pile of stacked pallets. She didn't wait to see if he got up. She ran, adrenaline coursing through her veins, weaving through the maze of pens until she found a relatively safe distance. Catching her breath, she leaned against a corrugated metal wall, wiping the blood from her cheek. She was bruised, battered, but alive, and she had a name, Dominic Moretti. She needed more information. She headed back to the diner, needing the familiar comfort of bad coffee and a quiet corner to think. While waiting for her order, she started digging online, searching for any connection between Sarah Beth and the Stockyards. She stumbled across old newspaper archives, local stories about accidents, suspicious deaths, and labor disputes. And then a face. Frank Miller, Sarah Beth's father. A photograph from 10 years ago showing him working as a foreman at the Stockyards. Below the photo, a brief article. Frank Miller had died in a workplace accident, a fall from a loading dock. The investigation had been inconclusive, ruled accidental. But something about the photo nagged at her. Frank Miller standing beside a younger man, impeccably dressed, a confident smile on his face. Victor Sterling. Red zoomed in on the image, studying their faces. They weren't simply acquaintances. They were close, friends perhaps, or something more. Then she noticed another photograph, a smaller inset image. It was the same scene, taken from a different angle, and in the background, partially obscured, stood a figure, a tall, burly man with a distinctive scar on his face, Silas. A dizzying connection started to form. The accidental death, the hidden compartment, the burner phone, the fancy folks, Victor Sterling. Frank Miller hadn't just died in an accident. He'd been silenced, and now his daughter was caught in the same web of deceit and danger. The waitress slammed a mug of coffee in front of her, jolting her back to reality. The diner was quiet, the rain still drumming against the windows. Red stared at the coffee, her mind racing. This wasn't a simple skip out anymore. This was a descent into something dark and dangerous. And she had a feeling she was running out of time. The chipped formica of the diner booth felt colder this morning, less a familiar comfort and more a prelude to discomfort. Red pushed her half-eaten breakfast aside, the greasy spoon taste doing little to settle the churning in her gut. Frank Miller hadn't died in an accident. It was becoming sickeningly clear. He'd been a loose end, neatly tied off. and Victor Sterling was the one holding the rope. She needed to confront him again, and this time she wouldn't be subtle. Sterling's office was even more imposing in the daylight. The panoramic view of the harbor now seemed less inviting, more a symbol of his detached power. He greeted her with the same carefully calibrated smile, as if their previous conversation hadn't taken a decidedly menacing turn. "Ms. Red, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I've been doing some digging, Mr. Sterling, and I've found some interesting connections." "Connections?" He steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. "Frank Miller. You were closer to him than you let on, and you were photographed with him shortly before his death, a death that was conveniently ruled an accident." Sterling's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed. "A good man. His death was a tragedy. A tragedy you were conveniently on hand for." Red leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "And I've also heard whispers about your associations with people who prefer to operate outside the law." "Whispers are cheap, Ms. Red, slanderous even. I'm a lawyer. I represent all sorts of people. It doesn't mean I endorse their activities. These aren't just people, Sterling. These are organized criminals. Dominic Moretti, the Stockyards. Does that ring a bell?" He finally allowed a flicker of annoyance to cross his face. "I advise you to be careful, Ms. Red. You're treading on dangerous ground. Some things are better left undisturbed. Is that a threat?" "It is a word of caution, for your own sake." His voice had lost its polished veneer, revealing a steel core. "I suggest you focus your energies elsewhere. There are plenty of lost souls in this world who don't have powerful friends." Red stood up, her jaw tight. "I don't scare easily, Sterling, and I don't back down." "You should," he said, his voice low and menacing, "for your own good." She left his office, the weight of his implied threat settling on her shoulders. She needed concrete evidence, something he couldn't dismiss with legal maneuvering and veiled warnings. She called on an old contact, a rodeo veteran named Billy, the Kid Kincaid. Billy had seen everything in his years on the circuit, from crooked judges to backroom gambling. He had a knack for sniffing out trouble and an extensive network of informants. "Sterling, huh?" Billy said, chewing on a toothpick. "Heard stories. Slick operator. Got a reputation for making problems disappear." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that involve dirty money, broken bones, and people ending up at the bottom of the harbor. I heard he started out doing legal work for some of the bigger players in Boston. Then he branched out, started laundering money through shell corporations, real estate, mostly, and livestock. Livestock, the stockyards." It clicked into place. An illegal operation, moving stolen cattle, falsifying paperwork, washing money through inflated sales and phantom shipments. Billy provided a few names, a few leads. Red spent the next 12 hours tracing them, sifting through public records, following a tangled web of shell companies and offshore accounts. The trail led back to Moretti and to a network of corrupt officials who turned a blind eye to the illegal activity in exchange for a cut of the profits. She needed proof, something tangible, and she knew where to find it. Sterling's office, breaking into the Mariners Trust building, wasn't easy. Security was tight, but Red wasn't known for being deterred by obstacles. She bypassed the alarm system, disabled the cameras, and slipped into Sterling's office under the cover of darkness. The office was meticulously organized, almost sterile. Everything was in its place, too perfect. She knew the real evidence wouldn't be on display. It would be hidden. She focused on his safe, cleverly disguised as a bookshelf. It took her 30 minutes, a specialized lockpick, and a healthy dose of patience. But she finally cracked it open. Inside, she found what she was looking for: financial records, ledgers detailing illicit transactions, contracts signed by Moretti, and a detailed map of the stockyards, highlighting specific pens and processing plants. She photographed everything, meticulously documenting each page. This was enough. This was enough to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. As she was leaving the office, she noticed a flicker of movement in the hallway. A security guard. She extinguished her flashlight and slipped into the shadows, moving with a practiced stealth. She managed to evade him, escaping the building undetected. But as she drove away from the Mariners Trust building, she noticed a pair of headlights in her rearview mirror. A black SUV, staying just far enough back to be unnoticeable, but close enough to be unsettling. She sped up, weaving through the quiet streets of Port Blossom. The SUV matched her speed, maintaining the same distance. She took a sharp turn onto a narrow coastal road, hoping to lose them. But they followed relentlessly. The SUV began to close the gap, its headlights glaring in her rearview mirror. Suddenly the SUV swerved, attempting to swipe her, swerving to avoid the collision. Her tires screeched on the asphalt as she fought to regain control of the Charger. The SUV came at her again, forcing her off the road and onto the gravel shoulder. She wrestled with the steering wheel, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision with a rock wall. The SUV sped past, then slowed down, blocking her path. She slammed on the brakes, bringing the Charger to a halt. The driver of the SUV stepped out, a menacing figure silhouetted against the headlights. Before she could react, her phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered it. "Drop the case," read. A voice rasped, distorted, but undeniably threatening. "Walk away. It is not worth it." "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is Sarah Beth. You keep digging, and she'll pay the price. We can make things very uncomfortable for her." The line went dead. Red stared at her phone, her blood running cold. They knew about Sarah Beth. They were using her as leverage. The threat wasn't just to her life anymore. It was to Sarah Beth's. The figure from the SUV was approaching, a grim smile on his face. Red knew she was in over her head, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The tip came from an unexpected source, the diner waitress, Mabel. Turns out, her nephew worked as a mechanic at a small garage outside of town, and he'd overheard Silas bragging about a package being kept at the Blackwood Ranch, a sprawling, isolated property 20 miles inland. Silas had slipped, mentioning the package hadn't been cooperative. Red didn't need any more convincing. The Blackwood Ranch was exactly as Mabel's nephew described, remote, dilapidated, and surrounded by miles of dense woodland. The main house was a 2-story Victorian, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. A sense of decay and menace hung heavy in the air. She parked the Charger a half-mile away, approaching on foot, using the tree line for cover. The ranch was eerily silent. No dogs barking, no sounds of activity. She circled around to the back, spotting a smaller, more modern building, a converted barn. A single light flickered inside. That is where she'd find Sarah Beth. She moved with caution, her Glock drawn, a practiced silence honed from years of navigating the darker corners of the world. She pressed her ear against the barn door, hearing muffled voices, Silas's gravelly tone, and a weaker, frightened voice that she instantly recognized as Sarah Beth's. "You understand, girl. Some things are better left buried. Your father learned that the hard way." The implication hung in the air like a death threat. Red didn't hesitate. She kicked in the door, bursting into the barn, gun raised. The scene inside was stark. Sarah Beth, bound to a chair, her face bruised and her eyes swollen with tears. Silas stood over her, a cruel smirk on his face, 2 hulking men flanking him. Well, well, Silas drawled, his eyes locking onto Red. "Look who decided to crash the party. Let her go, Silas." Red's voice was ice. Now, let's not be hasty. She is just a guest who knows too much." "She told me everything," Sarah Beth choked out. "About the smuggling, about the money laundering. I was going to go to the authorities. Silas laughed, a harsh guttural sound. Foolish girl. One of Silas's men lunged towards Red, a heavy wrench in his hand. Red dropped into a crouch, dodging the blow, and swiftly disarmed him with a sharp elbow to the wrist. She followed with a kick to the groin, sending him sprawling. The other man charged, swinging a fist. Red counterattacked with a series of rapid strikes. Soon, a jab to the nose, a hook to the jaw, a knee to the stomach. He went down hard. Silas, surprisingly agile for a man his size, pulled a pistol from his waistband. Red dove for cover behind an overturned feed bin as he fired. The bullet chipped concrete inches from her head. The barn erupted into chaos. Red returned fire, forcing Silas to duck for cover. Bullets whizzed past her ears, splintering wood. She weaved and dodged, using the crates and machinery as cover, engaging in a deadly game of cat and mouse. She managed to wound Silas in the arm, but he kept coming, fueled by rage and desperation. Sarah Beth, still bound to the chair, screamed. Red knew she couldn't win a protracted firefight. She needed to get out of there, get Sarah Beth to safety. She lobbed a smoke grenade towards Silas, creating a temporary screen of confusion. She dashed towards Sarah Beth, quickly freeing her from the ropes. "Come on," she shouted, pulling Sarah Beth to her feet. They burst out of the barn, sprinting towards the woods. Silas and his remaining man emerged from the smoke, firing wildly. Red returned fire, providing cover as they raced through the trees. They reached the charger, Red fumbling with the keys, adrenaline flooding her system. They jumped inside. She slammed the car into gear and roared down the dirt track. Silas and his man piled into a pickup truck, giving chase. The pursuit was relentless, a high-speed ballet of near misses and reckless maneuvers. Red navigated the winding back roads, dodging trees and potholes, pushing the charger to its limits. Silas's truck stayed on her tail, relentlessly trying to run her off the road. "He is gaining on us," Sarah Beth screamed, clutching the dashboard. "I know," Red grunted, wrestling with the steering wheel. "Hold on." Suddenly, a jarring thud. The charger lurched violently, throwing them both forward. Red fought to maintain control, but it was too late. A flat tire. A bullet had sliced through the sidewall. She managed to steer the car to a stop on a narrow shoulder, the engine sputtering and dying. They were trapped. Silas's pickup screeched to a halt behind them, blocking their escape. He and his man jumped out, weapons drawn, their faces grim. "Nowhere left to run, Red," Silas sneered, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "It is over," Sarah Beth whispered, her voice trembling. Before Red could respond, Sarah Beth spoke, her voice surprisingly firm. "My father, he knew about this. He found out about the smuggling ring, and he threatened to expose Sterling. That is why he fell from the loading dock. It wasn't an accident, it was murder." The revelation hung in the air, thick with dread. Red looked at Sarah Beth, her eyes filled with a newfound resolve. She realized Sarah Beth wasn't just a witness, but survival was looking increasingly unlikely. Silas and his man advanced, surrounding the disabled charger, their guns trained on Red and Sarah Beth. Red knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. "Any last words?" Silas asked, his eyes glinting with malice. Before Red could answer, a chorus of approaching headlights illuminated the forest. More figures emerged from the trucks, armed and dangerous. They were closing in, cutting off any hope of escape. Red looked at Sarah Beth, a grim understanding passing between them. They were cornered, and they were about to face the consequences of uncovering a secret that someone desperately wanted to keep buried. The forest exploded with gunfire. Red reacted on instinct, dropping to the floor of the charger, pulling Sarah Beth with her. Bullets ripped through the car's windows, shattering glass and sending fragments flying. Years spent navigating the underbelly of Port Blossom had honed her reflexes. turning her into a whirlwind of controlled violence. She returned fire, her Glock barking in the confined space, forcing Silas's men to take cover. It was a desperate, uneven fight. They had numbers, she had grit, and a lifetime of hard lessons. She used the wrecked car as a shield, firing controlled bursts, aiming for center mass, prioritizing suppression over precision. This wasn't about killing, it was about survival, about buying time. Sarah Beth, surprisingly chaos, huddled beside her, handing her magazines as Red emptied them. The training she'd received from Billy, the kid, Kincaid, dismissed as idle chatter about rodeo tactics, now proved invaluable. Use the environment, expect the unexpected, don't get pinned down. Red rolled out the driver's side door, using the car as cover, then crawled along the ditch. Gaining a flanking position, she lobbed a flashbang grenade towards Silas's crew, momentarily blinding and disorienting them. Then she moved, a blur of motion, disarming one man with a swift kick to the wrist, using his own gun to take down another. The fight was brutal, close quarters, a desperate struggle for survival. Red landed a powerful uppercut, sending a man reeling. Another came at her with a knife, but she sidestepped the attack and countered with a brutal elbow to the face. She wasn't elegant, but she was effective. Suddenly, Sarah Beth screamed. Red spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Silas had broken through her defenses and was standing over Sarah Beth, a gun pointed at her head. One more move, Red, and the girl gets it, Silas snarled. Red froze, her muscles screaming in protest. She was out of options. Then, Sarah Beth, with a courage that belied her fear, shoved Silas's arm upward, disrupting his aim. In that split second, Red reacted. She lunged forward, tackling Silas, knocking him to the ground. They wrestled for the gun, a desperate struggle in the mud and leaves. Finally, Red wrenched the weapon from his grasp, pinning him beneath her, her knee pressing into his chest. "It is over, Silas." But even as she spoke, Sarah Beth was fumbling with a small digital recorder hidden in her jacket pocket. She pressed play, and a clear voice filled the air. Victor Sterling's voice. "The shipments need to be expedited. The more we move, the more we make. And make sure Miller keeps his mouth shut. Understand?" Another recording, a heated conversation between Sterling and Silas, discussing Frank Miller's accident. He was getting too curious, asking too many questions, had to be handled. Sterling's voice was cold, devoid of remorse. Sarah Beth also produced a series of documents, 7 falsified shipping manifests, offshore account statements, evidence of massive money laundering. She'd been meticulously collecting it, hidden away, waiting for the right moment. "I knew they were going to come for me, just like they came for my father," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I had to be ready." The sounds of sirens grew closer. Red had managed to activate the emergency beacon on her phone during the chaos. She knew she had minutes before the area swarmed with law enforcement. "We need to move," she said, helping Sarah Beth to her feet. They commandeered one of the abandoned pickup trucks, leaving the wreckage of the Charger behind. They drove to a remote diner. Dots, a greasy spoon heaven miles from the ranch, a place where truckers and locals blended into the background. Red used the diner's payphone to reach out to her contacts. Billy, the kid Kincaid, and a few honest officers within the Maine State Police who owed her favors. She laid out the situation, providing the location of the ranch and the evidence Sarah Beth had collected. "This goes all the way to the top, Red," Billy said, his voice grim. "Sterling's a slippery fish. Be careful." Within an hour, the area around the Blackwood Ranch was swarming with police. Silas and his remaining men were apprehended attempting to flee. Red and Sarah Beth remained at Dots, anxiously awaiting updates. The news came through in snippets. Sterling was being questioned. The smuggling operation had been uncovered. Assets were being seized. "They've got Silas in custody," one of the officers on the phone said. "He is singing like a canary." Relief washed over Red, but it was fleeting. Something didn't feel right. She'd gone up against powerful men before, and she knew they didn't give up easily. But she pressed, a knot tightening in her stomach. Is Sterling cooperating? Not entirely. He is lawyered up, stonewalling the investigation. And there is something off about the financial records. They're complex, heavily layered. It is like he anticipated this and prepared a way out. Red's gut twisted. She knew it. Silas was just a pawn. Sterling was the mastermind, and he had covered his tracks too well. He was still out there pulling the strings. As she sat there staring out the diner window, watching the rain lash against the glass, she realized this wasn't over. It had just begun. Sarah Beth had been rescued, but the web of deceit and corruption ran deeper than she had imagined, and Victor Sterling was still very much in control. The dust hadn't settled, and the echoes of the chase were already warning her of the storm to come. The tip came from an unexpected source. A disgruntled accountant Sterling had tried to intimidate into silence. He'd provided Red with a single crucial piece of information. Sterling owned a private airstrip 20 miles south of Port Blossom, used primarily for discreet transfers. Red drove through the pre-dawn darkness, the Charger's headlights cutting through the mist. The airstrip was hidden amongst a dense forest, a long paved runway and a small hangar. A Gulfstream jet sat gleaming on the tarmac, engines warming. Sterling was planning to disappear. She parked the Charger out of sight and approached the hangar on foot, her Glock drawn, adrenaline pumping. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and anticipation. She could see Sterling through the hangar windows, pacing back and forth, speaking into a phone. He looked panicked, desperate. She kicked open the hangar door, bursting inside, gun raised. "It is over, Sterling." He whirled around, his face contorted with rage. "You again, I should have known." He barked an order into the phone, then slammed it down. 2 bodyguards materialized, flanking him, their hands reaching for concealed weapons. "Don't even think about it," Red warned, her voice cold and unwavering. The bodyguards hesitated, weighing their options. Red's reputation preceded her. They knew she wasn't afraid to use force. "You've ruined everything," Sterling screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "Years of planning, all for nothing." "You ruined your own life, Sterling," Red said, her gaze locked onto his. "You chose greed and corruption. You chose to silence anyone who stood in your way." One of the bodyguards lunged, attempting to disarm her. Red sidestepped the attack, delivering a swift kick to his jaw, sending him stumbling backwards. She grabbed his arm, using his momentum against him, twisting his wrist until he cried out in pain. The other bodyguard, seeing his colleague incapacitated, hesitated. Sterling seized the opportunity, reaching for a pistol hidden in his desk drawer. Red reacted instantly, firing a single shot. The bullet struck the drawer, splintering the wood and sending the gun clattering to the floor. "Don't move," she barked, pointing her Glock directly at Sterling. He froze, his face pale with fear. He knew he was cornered, but Sterling wasn't one to surrender easily. He feigned compliance for a moment, then lunged for the fallen pistol. Red anticipated the move, delivering a powerful kick to his chest, sending him crashing into a stack of boxes, gasping for air. Defeated. By then, the sounds of approaching sirens filled the air. Red had activated a silent alarm on her phone, alerting the authorities, and the officers Billy Kincaid had mobilized. The airstrip was quickly surrounded by police cars, their lights flashing in the darkness. The officers stormed the hangar, placing Sterling and his bodyguards under arrest. Red stood back, watching as they were led away in handcuffs. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of smuggling, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit murder. One of the officers informed Sterling, his voice devoid of sympathy. As Sterling was being led away, he glared at Red, his eyes burning with hatred. "You haven't heard the last of me, Red. This isn't over." Red didn't respond. She knew he was a liar and a manipulator, but his threat held little weight now. He was finished. The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. The Gulf Stream jet was searched, revealing a hidden compartment filled with counterfeit documents and untraceable cash. The extent of Sterling's smuggling operation was staggering, stretching across state lines and reaching into international waters. The financial records Red had recovered from Sterling's office, along with Sarah Beth's evidence, proved instrumental in dismantling his network. Corrupt officials were exposed, assets were seized, and the criminal enterprise Sterling had built over decades crumbled before their eyes. Sarah Beth was safe, under the protection of the state police, and offered witness protection. She looked exhausted but relieved, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Red found her at the diner, sipping a cup of coffee, her face pale but determined. "They got him," Red said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "Sterling's going to spend a long time in prison." Sarah Beth managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Red. You saved my life. You saved yourself, Sarah Beth. You were brave enough to stand up to him." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past few days settling upon them. Red knew she would carry the scars of this case for a long time. The violence, the lies, the constant threat of danger. But she also knew she had done the right thing. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the diner, Red felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She had helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice, and she had helped a young woman reclaim her life. She'd spent years operating in the shadows, skirting the edges of the law, taking cases that blurred the lines between right and wrong. But this case had been different. This case had reminded her why she had gotten into this business in the first place. Sivdu, to help people, to protect the vulnerable, to make a difference. She knew she couldn't erase her past mistakes, but she could learn from them. She could choose a different path, a more honest path. She could use her skills and experience to help others, to fight for justice, without compromising her own integrity. Red finished her coffee, a newfound resolve hardening her gaze. She was no longer running from the darkness. She was ready to face the light. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There'd always be shadows, but it was a beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Red felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The long arm of the law had finally caught up, and a measure of peace had descended upon Port Blossom.